Hello and welcome back, sleepywhatsit here, and I have another Miniatures Monday video. In this video, we're going to be looking at some techniques for improving the quality of your WizKids Unpainted miniatures before you start painting them. If you're unfamiliar with these miniatures, these are a number of lines of miniatures produced by WizKids. They go by the names of Nolzur's Marvelous Miniatures, Deep Cuts, Pathfinder Battles, and I think just Deep Cuts. They're all produced by WizKids. They come in both a pre-primed version and a painted version, though we'll be looking predominantly at the pre-primed version. A significant number of these techniques are probably applied to the pre-painted versions, though I've never actually looked at repainting one of those. These are the miniatures that if you go to any type of RPG gaming store where you're going to see a whole bunch of blister packs near the D&D or Pathfinder stuff, these are those. Like, you'll see they're quite common. They're relatively cheap. In Canada, most of them run for like $5 for two of them or $6 for two of them. Like, that's the type of price range that we're talking for these things. They're pre-assembled, they're pre-primed. They're designed for hobbyists to be able to just take out the packaging and immediately start painting, though realistically at the bare minimum you should at least run them through some soapy water just to make sure the surface is clean. Overall, I feel these miniatures fill a very important niche in the market. I think they are very good introduction miniatures because of the fact that they're pre-primed. That means that new painters don't have to go through the entire process of either spraying or brushing all on primer and dealing all with that technical things. I guess not technical. Basically, I feel that the most enjoyable part of painting miniatures is the actual painting process. All of the work that you have to do beforehand, cleaning the models, assembly, and priming them, is a necessary evil to get to the process of painting them. As a new painter, especially because you're unfamiliar with some of the techniques required to like use a rattle can or an airbrush to prime a miniature very well, if you want to figure out if you want to be painting miniatures as a hobby, painting miniatures is probably the best way to actually do it, not doing all the pre-work beforehand. The pre-work is something you'll learn to do afterwards. Being able to get to painting immediately, I think, is actually very valuable. This is a similar reason that I really enjoy the Reaper Bones miniatures, because you can just get to actually painting without a lot of rigmarole. That being said, I feel, especially with the WizKids miniatures, these are decent to quite good sculpts, depending on the specific model that we're looking at. They're being done a significant disservice by the quality of manufacture that you see from WizKids. So this is things like the amount of primer they put on is insane. They've gotten a little bit better recently, but especially some of the early ones, it's just kind of crazy how much primer they went on. There tends to be significant amounts of flashing on them, and the assembly on them is questionable often, with significant gaps and things like that. Personally, I would love an option to these miniatures where I would get a sprue or just a disassembled miniature, and I'd be responsible for cleaning up assembly and priming them myself. Since a significant amount of what we're going to be discussing in this video is actually just basically undoing a whole bunch of the steps they do in pre-assembly. That being said, before we get into the actual process, I kind of want to discuss some of the reasons why you may not want to do this. Because nothing I'm going to be discussing in this video is a magic silver bullet type fix that's going to take you 5 seconds to do, and it will magically make your miniature 90% better. All of these techniques have a significant time or effort investment in them. I don't want you to get the misconception that this should all be super fast and that you should do this with every miniature. I did this with a whole bunch of miniatures recently for the purposes of this video, but honestly, when it comes to these miniatures, I don't do this all the time. So some reasons why you shouldn't go through this process. If this is one of your first miniatures, especially your first miniature, I would highly recommend going through this process. As I said before, the best way I think to learn if you want to do miniature painting as a hobby is to actually paint miniatures. And everything we're going to be discussing here is not actually painting. It's all the pre-work associated with painting, but it's not the actual holding a brush, sitting, doing, putting colors on your model. I think there's a lot more value in doing that early on, more so than what we're going to be doing here. Because if you don't enjoy that part of the hobby, you're really not going to enjoy this part of the hobby. So if this is one of your first miniatures, I would not do this. This would be something to come back to later. Second of all, if you're in a hurry, I would not consider going down this road. The processes I'm going to be taking you through in this video are relatively time intensive, both the combination of your personal time in actually doing things and your time required like over durations, because there's going to be times where you have to soak things for like half a day. Like, so this isn't I need 5 orcs tonight for my campaign type thing. This is not going to work for that. This is not a solution for that. The next reason why you may not want to go through this process is if the amount of time that you're going to be putting into painting your miniature is relatively limited. So this process is kind of assuming that you have not necessarily indefinite amounts of time, but you have a significant amount of time, like on the order of hours to spend painting these miniatures. If you are needing / desiring to do paint jobs that are more on the sub-hour, either because you just want something that looks decent on your table, you don't necessarily want to make something super fancy, or you're just physically under a time crush, these techniques are going to be adding substantial amounts of time to the painting process, and not every miniature necessarily deserves that. The simple reality, a whole bunch of monsters that are going to be used in a single encounter and are kind of just a throwaway don't really deserve spending like an hour or a half hour scrubbing them before you even paint. So this is one of those time balance things. If you're not considering doing a detailed paint job on this, it's probably not worth doing this beforehand. So we are not improving in the sense of that this will make every paint job you do on these miniatures better, though to a certain extent they might. We are more looking at the way that they are prepared for you limits the quality of the paint job that you're physically capable of doing on them, and we're going to be taking away some of those restrictions. So if the quality of paint job that you were planning on doing for the model fits within what you started with, basically if you look at the model and it looks good to you, like you're like, I can do the paint job I want to do on it as is, don't go down this route. And finally, I think this is my fourth point. Yeah, probably my fourth point at this point. I'll see it while I'm editing this. I'll see how many bullet points I actually have this section. But anyway, the final point I have is if this is your only version of this model, if this is, per se, at some point it goes out of print, or it was a very expensive model, or something along those lines, you cannot risk losing or damaging this model, don't do this. This is not a risk-free process. We are going to be stripping paint off. This will involve brushing. This will involve some light solvents, things like that. If you cannot possibly risk damaging this model, then this is not something you should be doing, because I don't want to give you the impression this is a completely risk-free process that we're going through. I have previously abraded some of the details off of models doing this, so I don't want to. So let's actually get into the process now. The overview of this process is what we're going to be doing is stripping all of the primer off the models. Then we're going to be cleaning up flashing on the models. So this is mold lines and things like that, basically excess amounts of plastic that are on there. And then we're going to be filling in any gap details. So basically anywhere where the assembly has left gaps that we think are unnecessary or inappropriate. And then finally repriming them. So for actually stripping our models, the solvent that we're going to be using is called Simple Green. This is available in North America and places like, what do we call it, Home Depot is where I get this large bucket of it. I believe it's also available in the UK. I don't know about the rest of Europe. It's a concentrated, biodegradable solvent. It's not harsh. It doesn't eat plastic really quickly. A lot of the solvents that you would use on metal, just eat plastic super fast, so that's dangerous. So what we're going to be doing is taking our model, an Umber Hulk here, putting it in a container, and we're going to be basically mixing about 50% Simple Green, 50% water. It's a concentrated liquid. The reason I cut it down is it basically comes down to economy. I have found that it's not any less effective being reduced like 50%, but I also get a lot more of use out of it. You could go full strength. No matter what you're using, I recommend using testing models before doing it. So like I'm going to say use Simple Green on WizKids because that's what works for me. I would tell you, check that the formulation is the same in your country and try it out on a model that you don't mind risking before you actually do something that you think is important, because they may change the formulation. There might be something subtly different in your market that makes it not suitable for this. So you can see here for the second one, I'm just throwing a whole bunch of miniatures in there. We'll be looking at these a little bit later. So the process that I go through in this video is soaking them for about 12 hours, give or take, taking them out, scrubbing them, washing them off with a bit of water, throwing them back in to soak for another 12 hours, rinse and repeat until I've removed enough paint that I'm happy with them. My previous go-to technique for scrubbing off the paint was first to use a little bit more of a stiff-bristled cleaning brush, as you can see here, and initially braid the paint a little bit, loosen it up, get the kind of bulk mass out of the way, only lightly brushing with that, and then going in with a used toothbrush and doing the deep scrub on this. The primary reason for having the two different brushes is I like using the stiffer bristle brush to do the initial, just get the big chunks off really quickly, and then we could work in with toothbrush to work off the rest of it, because this chemical does somewhat soften the surface a little bit. Like it's very subtle, but relatively speaking, if you let this soak for an extended period of time on the order of hours that I normally do, like 8, 12, 24, 48 if I forget to take it out. If you've let it soak that much, you don't really want to be taking your big super stiff bristle brush and just grinding it in there for a long time, because that will take details off, which I have actually done with other models. So that's why I do the initial pass with the stiffer one, and then come in with the brush and work it in. And then after having done that a few times, there's always going to be nooks and crannies you just can't get in with the brush. I would take something like a sculpting pick, small and detailed like that, and just slowly basically work the paint out of any little crevices, nooks and crannies you can in the brush. So that's the overall process I previously used. While working on these models, I experimented a little bit with using an old electric toothbrush, which works like a regular toothbrush but better. And I also experimented a little bit with using an ultrasonic cleaner with Simple Green in it. The ultrasonic cleaner worked really, really well, and I'm probably going to do another video in the future comparing different techniques for strip, specifically just working out basically the best way to strip paint. But I can't necessarily recommend it because I'm not sure how safe it is to use with your ultrasonic cleaner. Not that I'm suggesting that this chemical is going to hurt you badly, but more it's going to hurt the ultrasonic cleaner. And I have personally achieved good results by just using a brush and sitting there and scrubbing. After we've stripped all the primer off of our models, the next step for this process is going to be removing all the flashing and mold lines from the models. So as you're cleaning the model, you'll probably notice this quite distinctively, but a lot more of these imperfections are going to show up. So some of the mold lines you'll see are relatively easy to clean up. You just run your knife along them, either scraping along or cutting them off, and they'll pop off really nicely. Some of them not so much, especially where the mold as opposed to creating a line that's pushed up, is kind of created a crevice pushed down that's indenting into it. Those are much harder to fix. You may have to put in some green stuff in the next step to get to it, but so it's basically looking over the model, trimming it all off, cleaning up as much as you want. Previously, the way I've gone about doing this is cleaning off the primer and then doing the process of removing the mold lines. I realized at the end of the batch that I was doing for this video that I may want to do the sequence the other way around, do the first pass of mold line trimming before I remove the primer, just because with the primer on, sometimes it's a little bit easier to see the mold lines. On the other hand, because there's so much paint being put on the models from the factory, honestly, you can't see some of these mold lines beforehand. But again, this is like with all miniatures, basically put in the amount of effort that you think is appropriate to get the result that you're going to be happy with. But remember, with mold lines, especially with repriming them, because we're going to be putting on much thinner primer, what looks like a trivial mold line now will maybe more pronounced when you actually start painting and putting washes and dry brushing on. So try and clean it up as much as you want. So now that we have our models all stripped down and we've removed as much of the mold line flashing that we're going to be taking off the model, we're going to be doing our first additive step. So you can see here on the Umber Hulk especially, there's a number of deep creases from where where the model was assembled and the various parts went in, where they didn't sit exactly right. These aren't necessarily horrible things, but I know from experience from painting that some of these lines are going to show up quite deeply when I start doing things like shading and putting washes and things like that. So I want to shallow them out a little bit. So we're going to mix up some green stuff, which you've seen in a number of other videos that I've done previously. And then we're going to make little tiny snakes out of it. And then you put the snake into the joint or wherever you want. You squish it in with some sort of tool. And then to finish that off, what you're going to want to do is get a bit of water in your tool and run it across there, because the water works as a solvent for the green stuff and it will smooth it out. So this is kind of how you get from kind of chunky tool marky poked up things or things with fingerprints on it. Put a bit of water on it, rub it, it'll smooth it out nicely. So I did this everywhere on the Umber Hulk on the underside to make the joints a little bit less pronounced. Most of the models I was doing for this video, other than the Umber Hulk and the Owl, didn't really require that much green stuff. Things like the Beholder that WizKids makes, I found those pieces do not fit well together when you actually go to assemble them. So I ended up using a large amount of green stuff on the version of that I'm working on to fill in all the joints around there. So depending on the model, it may or may not require a significant amount of this type of filling. And now we move on to our final step, which is repriming the models. In my case, I like putting a zenithal highlighting on everything because at least it makes my models look spiffy when they're sitting on the shelves unpainted before I actually get to finishing them, and also does assist me somewhat in actually painting them. So this is with an airbrush, this kind of standard technique that I do for everything. Lay down a dark gray black layer, in this case German Panzer Gray from Vallejo, to cover everything, then shoot from a 45 to 60 degree angle from above with a light gray from Vallejo, and then shoot from down on top with white from Vallejo. That's how to do this in airbrush. You can do the same basic process with a rattle can. If you want to do something more with brushes, what you can do is base your model out in dark gray black, however you want, be it with brush, rattle can, airbrush. And then what you can do is using a big old dry brush up and down using a light gray creamy color to get the highlights is another way to get this kind of zenithal pattern. Though I discuss using a zenithal priming because that's my preference for my painting style, there's no reason that you couldn't just do a flat prime. If you prefer doing the black, more Games Workshop style and working over black, or if you just want to do light gray or white because you know you're going to be doing a very light paint job, flat painting is totally fine. So with having reprimed the models, that's kind of where I want to leave this off here. This isn't meant to be a hard showcase of, look at this model that I painted using the crappy base way that WizKids did, and look how awesome it is with the way I do it. Look how much more awesome. It's not really meant to be that type of thing. This is more of, if you're the person that has looked at the WizKids models and you've kind of dismissed them because of the pre-primed nature of them, you know it's going to limit your ability to do the techniques that you want or the quality of paint job you want. This is I wanted to show you how I personally go through and change the model so that I can do the type of paint job I want. I think WizKids has actually produced some really good models. Not necessarily all of them, some of them are kind of dodgy models, but there's a large number of models they've produced that have a lot of detail and a quality of design by whoever did the original modeling that I think has been completely obscured by the manufacturing process and that very heavy layer of primer that they put on them. I will concede with regards to primer specifically, WizKids appears to be in the most recent batch of miniatures that they have been doing a significantly better job of priming their miniatures. The older ones from a year or two ago were bad. They had thick primer. Like the Vallejo light gray primer, if you've ever worked with it, comes out vaguely a matte color when you spray it. They were spraying so much of it onto the models to fill gaps and cover overages and such that it was going shiny. So if you've ever worked with any type spray primer, you have an idea of how much primer that actually is to make a matte satin primer go glossy. On the other hand, a lot of these models, especially with the newer quality of priming that they've done since they seem to fix some of their prime, are perfectly good. If you are just planning to do a quick paint job, you just need something for your game. Like basically, if you care more about playing with your models than necessarily painting your models, this is probably not the route for you to go. I hope you found this informative. If you enjoyed the video, please give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. If you know other people that are painting WizKids miniatures that may be interested in this, please share it with them. I try and put out miniature videos every week, sometimes on Monday. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.